Hello and welcome to the Caseware Idea AuditNet webinar event, Overcoming the Challenges of Audit Reporting in a Multinational Corporation. My name is Jim Kaplan. I'm the founder of AuditNet and I'll be moderating today's event. Serving the global audit community, AuditNet is the primary online resource for auditors to share resources, tools, and experiences. AuditNet has been at the forefront of websites dedicated to promoting the use of audit technology and now offers high-quality, web-based training for auditors and finance professionals. Caseware Idea, the makers of Idea Data Analysis software, has partnered with AuditNet to share presentations featuring the best practices of respected professionals in the audit community. I'm pleased now to introduce today's guest speaker, Lenny Block, Vice President of Internal Audit at NASDAQ. He brings over 35 years of professional experience in internal audit, business process reengineering, database design, and project management. Lenny has extensive practical experience managing all phases of an internal audit, ensuring regulatory compliance, operational effectiveness, and financial reporting integrity for NASDAQ-owned entities worldwide. He also leads the Internal Audit's Data Analytics program and donates his expertise to the corporate ethics team on foreign corrupt practices compliance. Thanks, and let me now turn the floor over to Lenny. Lenny?
All right, thanks, Jim. And I want to first start out by saying thanks to Caseware and AuditNet for allowing me to share some thoughts and ideas on a topic that maybe doesn't get the attention it deserves in contributing to the success of a multinational audit team. So I want to, again, thanks Caseware and AuditNet for this opportunity. I also appreciate everyone trying to spend some of their day with us today to listen to some of these ideas. And I hope you go back to your audit shops and take a look at some of the challenges your audit shops are facing today, internally and externally, and some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. And see what things you're doing at your shops, things you're not maybe doing. And the whole thing today is to spawn some ideas of things you can use if you have an audit shop that consists of people from different cultures, different backgrounds, and previous experience. What I'm going to talk about today is really based on real experiences. This is something we've done at NASDAQ. I've been there over 15 years. And the things I'm going to talk about are a lot of lessons learned, a lot of challenges we faced, and then how we actually are meeting some of those challenges. So a little bit more about me. Again, as Jim said, I'm currently the Vice President of Internal Audit for the NASDAQ stock market and the NASDAQ Corporation. And my responsibilities are with the U.S. business team. And we really, we have a team that really does all the financial regulatory audits in the U.S. and we also help out around the world as well. Responsible, as he said, for the data analytics program on the business side, which we use Caseware Idea, and I'm going to show you definitely some projects that we've used to be successful in overcoming some of the challenges. And then prior to NASDAQ, I had many opportunities in different companies providing leadership, systems analysis, etc. And I think that's really important to be a good internal auditor. We're like internal consultants, I like to call us that. So it's more about going from project to project and adding value for each project. From an educational standpoint, I basically, you can see I have a CPA, CIA, both accounting and information systems background. Besides working at NASDAQ and internal audit, I also teach at Southern New Hampshire University. I teach accounting and auditing out there. For the last 15 years, I was based out of the Rockville, Maryland office of NASDAQ near Washington, D.C., but just recently relocated to more of the sunny skies of North Carolina and Ocean Isle Beach, and I work out of my home most of the time, but do travel to manage my teams once a month to the different offices. Besides the work, I'm a big sports fan, and we're going to talk about sports today, and we're going to talk a little bit about ice hockey and how the concepts basically in ice hockey and sports really help in overcoming some of the challenges in multinational corporations. So I'm going to be talking a lot about that later on in the presentation, and I think it'll be kind of interesting to see how sports and ice hockey helps with some of the multicultural challenges. Now move on to what NASDAQ is, and we're really more than a stock exchange. Everybody sees the NASDAQ every day on TV, and the index of the New York Stock Exchange went up, or the Dow went up, and then the NASDAQ index went up or down. But we really are becoming much more of a fintech company, and you know, and it also shows you how we're becoming so much more international to be able to tackle that. On the stock exchanges and clearinghouses in the U.S., for New York, which is the NASDAQ, the Boston Stock Exchange, Philadelphia. But we also have the stock exchanges in Stockholm, Helsinki, Copenhagen, Iceland, and that's just in the Nordics. And we also do on some of the exchanges over in the Baltic countries, and I'm going to talk about that later as well. So everybody knows NASDAQ is listed, publicly traded companies are listed on the NASDAQ. We have multiple asset classes and equities and options and commodities. So that's more of our traditional business that most people know us for. But the last two are really more interesting. What we are getting more on is global information services. NASDAQ sells the data from the different trading venues that we have. If you ever watch CNBC, you see those tickers going across the bottom. Well, that data is fed by NASDAQ and other markets. And so we make a good part of revenue from selling the data products, which are both index-related as well as just different types of subscriptions that NASDAQ sells for data. And the last piece is market technology, which is not just that we use our own technology to run our markets, but we also trade, we also sell our technology around the world to various exchanges, broker-dealers, alternative trading venues. We have about 200, on the market tech side, we have about 250 clients around the globe, that including Turkey and Singapore. A lot of it use our smart surveillance tool that is used at these exchanges for surveilling of their markets, and also certain regulators around the world are starting to use NASDAQ surveillance technology such as smarts. And the last thing I'll mention here on global information services is that we get about a third of our revenue now from the selling of data. So what's important here on the slide is that NASDAQ is much more than a market, and you can see some of the international flavor here. And so that has a direct impact on how we put our audit team together to handle these different areas. Our audit team is about 22 people worldwide. You see some pictures there, and one, we've got New York on the left, we've got Vilnius in the middle, and we have Stockholm on the right. And those are three key locations. Again, 22 auditors across those locations. 15 are prominently in the U.S. and about 7 are non-U.S. I just want to take 1 second and recognize somebody, and I believe she's on the broadcast. And her name is Anne-Marie Udmeyer, and she's our Vice President of Internal Audit of the Nordic and Baltic regions. And her input was so valuable to this presentation. You know, as a member of running our non-U.S. audit team, she's the one who has, and her team have to really deal with the challenges I'm going to talk about today on a day-to-day basis. Anne-Marie and I became not just colleagues, but good friends as a result of an acquisition when NASDAQ acquired the Nordic exchanges probably about 11, 12 years ago now. So I want to thank Anne-Marie, and hopefully she's listening. Okay, so as I mentioned, you know, acquisitions, you know, bring together folks from different backgrounds, different experiences, and culture, which is probably the number one thing, right? And I'll be speaking about this today. So when we become a multinational audit team, one of the questions are, you know, how do we adapt to the other folks' culture that come on, you know, to our teams? Now, I'm going to be speaking today from a U.S. perspective because, again, NASDAQ acquired a lot of these. And so, you know, I'm going to talk about us a little bit as the acquiring audit team, bringing on folks from other audit teams. But again, for folks that are not in the U.S., you know, and you were acquiring, say, a U.S. company that you brought U.S. auditors on, you know, I want you to reverse the roles and see how you may have been tolerant of bringing on folks from, you know, maybe not your own country, U.S., or it could be other countries, right? And how and the way you are handling bringing, you know, together the diverse cultures that come out. So take a look at this slide, right? And hopefully, if you look at the bottom, you don't get too much of that at your organization, right? When bring on people, most of us, think that our way of doing things is the only way or the best way. And let's be honest, we're all human, and I think a lot of us think like that. But we don't want to get to a point where, we're doing what this cartoon kind of says, right? I mean, audit teams now are being assembled from so many diverse backgrounds and experiences and language. And then, like, we all like to stay the course and do do things the way we've always done it. Again, we think our way is the best way. But we really have to start to look at things a little more broadly than just, getting out of our comfort box. Partnership, that's a key word on this slide, right? I mean, again, through the mergers and acquisitions, we're really entering into a partnership with audit teams from other companies, whether we're the acquiring company or the acquiree, right? Being the dominant audit shop that brings in other people, it's a little more tougher because, we try not, you don't want to come across so dominant that you're not really, listening to the other folks and adapting to things that might be coming on board. And we're going to see some of these differences coming up in the next couple slides of really, it's an eye-opener of different things that if you're in the U.S., when you start to work with audit, you bring companies in from different countries, you're going to see a whole host of different challenges that you never thought about or experienced before. So again, the whole key here is you really have to become a partnership with the folks on our audit team. So you want everybody to work as one and feel at home. So, partnership is one thing, and you can say we're going to partner with somebody. Yeah, we're going to be open-minded. We're going to work with our colleagues. But you really have to, the key word on this slide is listening, right? You really truly have to listen to what they say with an open mind and not just necessarily discount it, but really take heart, listen to what they're saying. And again, we are an interconnected world through technology. And you think, well, that solves a lot of problems. And it does. But the world can be very different outside the U.S. in many ways that you don't realize from an audit world, especially when it comes to regulation and rules, right? And so being totally aware of these outside the U.S. regulations and rules definitely affects the way you structure your audit team, the way you structure your audit plan, and then just how you communicate with each other on a day-to-day basis. So it's just really important that, not just partnering, but truly listening to what these folks are saying that come in from the other countries. And I'm going to give you an experience in the next slide or two. I'm going to talk about an experience that we had at NASDAQ within our audit team and with the corporation when we did acquire some of the Nordic entities. Okay, so let's talk about some of the actual challenges, right, that differs on the U.S. versus the non-U.S. So if you look at this slide, two things come up, right? One is that the reporting outside the U.S. goes to multiple regulators, right? Yeah, we have some multiple different regulators in the U.S. For example, at NASDAQ, we have to work with the SEC. The CFTC, which is the Commodity Futures Commission. We have to work with the Department of Justice, just to name a few. Yeah, they are multiple regulators, but they also apply to all 50 states in the U.S., okay? But when you go outside the U.S., you're dealing with different countries and different regulators, and we're processing data for different countries and different folks in those countries. And so that's a much bigger challenge that you have to deal with, right? And so I want to show you a couple of these examples of what some of the regulations that the non-U.S. internal auditors face. So in trying to relate it back to NASDAQ, right, we have compliance plans and reports that have to be submitted to the Baltic and Nordic regulators. Well, there's a lot of Nordic regulators, right? We have Sweden, we have Finland, we have Denmark, we have Iceland, just to name a few. So those are all different boards and different regulators in each of the countries, the FSAs in each country that look for certain reports. In the Baltics, we have Lithuania, we have Estonia, we have Latvia. So again, regulators in those countries, they want certain reports. And then separate from the regulators, you have boards, right? So again, where the first bullet, the regulators are similar to like the SEC, which they call the FSA, right? But then the second bullet is we have many boards in NASDAQ based on all our legal entities and countries. So we seem like we're always doing board packages for someone, right? And in the U.S., we have a couple of boards, and Canada, but when you get outside the U.S., you're dealing with a much different subset of reporting requirements. So that's very challenging. In addition, you have to deal with special reviews by each of those regulators. Each of those countries' regulators could require a special review and request documents. New regulations are always coming up from each of those regulators. So that creates challenge, not just for the business as a whole, but for our audit teams as well. How do we keep abreast of all these things that are going on? Again, the U.S. has it too, but not to the level of diversity and complexity that maybe some of the stuff we face outside the U.S. So other external challenges, in general, risk is becoming, we all know that risk is increasing everywhere, right, around the world. We don't, you cannot go pick up the Wall Street Journal, the Times, Washington Post without reading, another violation or regulation or thing that's going on. But additional events outside the U.S. are also increasing. And again, can be more complex because you're dealing with a lot of countries. We're one country here in the U.S., but outside, you've got multiple countries. So, some of the things I want to highlight here are compliance is more, complex, right? Because now there's the European Union, there's greater diversity between some of the U.S. programs and the European sanctions programs. Again, additional scrutiny is being put on cybersecurity by the regulators outside of the U.S. The last piece is, I think it was an important piece, which is data privacy. Many of you outside the U.S. or deal with non-U.S. entities have to deal with GDPR. That's data privacy. Yes, we have data privacy, rules and regulations in the U.S., but not to the degree that we're seeing in some of the European countries. And that becomes challenging, especially when you're doing a global audit and you need data from the different entities across the world, because we're not basically, as an auditor, there are restrictions on some of the data we could pull out of, say, a common system because we might be in violation of GDPR. So we have to obviously work with our legal counsel on those type of things. So again, these are just to show you some of the external challenges that our teams, our non-U.S. audit colleagues have to deal with a little more than we might in the U.S. Some additional ones. So there's MiFID II. Okay, MiFID II is a regulation that increases transfer across the EU, right? And so you bring the concept of the EU in and brings you to the next one, which is Brexit. So again, as NASDAQ, well, what does that mean if Brexit goes through? I guess they're doing some revoting, but that creates some definitely challenges for us as a company to make sure we can deal with if Britain does exit the European Union, what's that going to do to our contracts? We have contracts based on UK law, processing personal data. If they move to different countries, what is that going to do? So that's very, very important to, as an auditor, we have to be on top of that stuff in internal audit, right? Because controls are going to change. So again, this is another thing we're not really dealing with in the U.S., but you're dealing with this whole European Union requirements. Cloud computing, we're seeing more and more regulation scrutiny on the cloud, and what the regulators want to know is, What are the controls to protect the data in the cloud, right? Not just in the U.S., but we've seen a lot more of this in the other countries outside the U.S. And then the last piece here is the structure. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different boards, there's a lot of different regulators outside the U.S., and so trying to keep current of our regulated entities at NASDAQ to ensure we're in good graces and reporting correctly to the regulators and the boards is challenging. So again, the businesses work on it, but we in internal audit have to make sure we're keeping current with all this as well. So that's only half the battle. Now let's move on to, that was more external, right? What goes on outside of our company, outside of your companies. But let's talk about now, being a multinational and reporting, auditing in a corporation. Let's look at a bit more on what's on the inside of audit shops, right? And so these are the things that challenge us as we try and, just try and execute our daily audit plans and build our staffs, right, around and doing official audit projects. So if you look at this, some of these, regulatory rule books, they vary among different countries. The U.S. is very prescriptive in a lot of rules that we deal with regulation, but non-U.S. are more principle-based. And so that becomes a bit of a challenge for our team in knowledge transfer, training, and consistency of our audits across, different audits. It's hard to use some standard audit programs because they are so different, right? And so as auditors, we have to learn the next couple of foreign currency translation, IFRS versus GAAP, and accounting principles. Believe it or not, different external audit teams in multiple countries. In NASDAQ, and we are the testers of SOX. We test the operational effectiveness of our SOX controls. But we're testing controls in Sweden and Lithuania and the U.S., and we're working with the external auditors, for example. But E&Y are our auditors, but they have a team in the U.S., they have a team in Lithuania, they have a team in Stockholm. So that becomes challenging, trying to coordinate, all the different parties across the different countries, to make sure we have consistent SOX reporting. And so that, again, that falls on the internal audit team with different cultures and different experiences to try and coordinate that. We have local different bank account and treasury is something we have to deal with. When you're dealing with a multinational corporation, auditing the treasury function can be quite challenging because you have, different restrictions in different countries, right? So being familiar with those things is a learning experience and knowledge. But again, we want to be consistent in our audit approach, so learning the local things. And then the last thing is probably the most interesting is the legal entities and intercompany transactions. And I want to use this as a quick example of the Welcome to Sweden and a lesson learned, and it goes back to listening and partnership, as I mentioned earlier. Before we bought the Nordic and Baltic exchanges, NASDAQ was pretty much a U.S.-based company, and we didn't have a lot of different legal entities and intercompany transactions and all these other things, foreign currency. But when we bought a non-U.S. company, we said, well, we had a lot of things that were brought to our attention. There are a lot of intercompany transactions that people were being involved in. There are foreign currency. There are a lot of differences. So the question is, how well did we listen at NASDAQ to some of that? And to be honest, we had some challenges, and the lesson learned is we really should listen to these folks, because when we tried to start closing the books for different, for these entities and do a consolidated close across the world, we may not have thought through some of the things that we should have done. So when you do acquire companies, really listen carefully some of their accounting and issues that they're facing, especially with intercompany and board reporting and legal entity. And I think we do a much better job on that now when we buy other companies. So that's just a lesson learned from a long time ago. Again, more internal challenges within audit, and this one is pretty self-explanatory, and probably the number one thing is language, right? Obviously, it's verbal and written. English is not the main language for a lot of folks that we bring onto our audit teams. It's often the second or even third or fourth language that our audit colleagues work on. And I admire them because I know I couldn't speak 2 or 3 different languages. So we have to, we have to work on that, within our teams. The cultural tendencies, we have to learn to learn what's different about these folks. Challenging a superior may not be a common practice in a country. It's a cultural thing. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it's something we have to learn because, again, I'm speaking from a U.S. perspective, it's a lot different. We are more apt to challenge something, right? Audit skepticism is very important. Again, skepticism in audit is a good thing no matter what country you're in. So, I mean, we have to be aware of the cultural tendencies. Holidays and vacations. We get into some philosophical challenges we have to deal with. We put our multinational audit teams together. There's different philosophy about in Europe and in the U.S. on vacations. They tend to take, holidays are much longer sometimes in the summer. So audit projects that we work together on may not make as much progress because of that. So again, you have to be aware of that as you're putting your teams together. Scheduling meetings and time differences. This one is, I'm sure everyone can relate to this one. We do a lot of work in the U.S. with the Nordics, so 7 a.m. I'm usually on some kind of call with it, but you do have to, it makes it challenging to schedule meetings. In the U.S. or for the folks in Europe, you might have to stay a little bit longer at night to accommodate it, which kind of leads into the work-life balance. Again, a bit of a philosophical differences maybe in the U.S. versus non-U.S. That has to be taken into account. To be a successful audit team, all these things are important, and the team has to work out the differences on that. Otherwise people are going to resent, well, why do I have to come in early every day, and why can't they stay late at night? So, I mean, these are just real experiences, real challenges that, you need to be working with your teams on. Competition for talent. That's also a challenge to put a good team together. Outside the U.S., it's got a pretty good job market for what we do in audit. But, outside the U.S., when you have auditors in different countries, the supply of good audit talent is maybe not be there. So it's a little tougher to get the right people and keep the right people. So, you want to make sure you have an emphasis on making sure those folks feel connected on your audit team out in these different areas. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. So I think these are things that you should be really focusing on. So I mean, this is what, the challenges, both internal and external, I've been talking about. So what I want to do is I want to kind of get into now, how does NASDAQ meet these challenges, right? So I'm going to talk about 4 major areas. Right, I'm going to talk about what the challenges are and then how we're meeting those things. And these are the 4 areas I'm going to focus on. Evidence, the evidence we talk about regulators. How do we ensure that the evidence is there to satisfy the regulator? How do we deal with the multi-country board reporting, which, I mean, I think 45% of you are interested in the first 2 bullets. And then I think 3 is very important, delivering a consistent audit message across the organization. How do we bridge the gap with all our different folks on these different teams that we come across as one unified audit team that's in sync? And the last one is developing a universal language between our audit team, a language that everybody understands. So now I'm bringing my hockey analogy. And why hockey? That's coming up shortly. But the key is this is within our audit team. What's the way that what's a really good way we can all communicate, even though we have different cultural and language issues? So the first thing I want to talk about is the evidence to satisfy the regulator, right? It's a regulator. Every regulator wants to see coverage for their country. This can create an administrative combinations, and these are based on real things, right? When you do auditing, they want to see that their country's transactions were considered in the testing or in the sample or in the population. And that's not always the case, especially for some of the smaller countries, right? If you do things based on risk, you may not be able to pick up, a transaction in a smaller country. So some of the things what we're starting to do to meet that challenge is in our sampling, we're trying to eliminate thresholds, right, in certain areas and risk levels, right? Look for patterns in transactions. If you look at just transactions when you're sampling different things, whether it's expenses or AP, for example, or purchases, they may not meet the threshold because they're smaller countries and have, not as big expenses. But if you look at a pattern of transactions for a country, or set of individuals, that might be telling that, yeah, the same person is doing something at a smaller amount, but it's still something that's suspect. So I would make sure you consider looking at patterns within the smaller countries, so they have some kind of coverage, right? Even though it's smaller, even on a rotational sampling basis, pick some transactions from the smaller entities, because the regulators, you can show the regulators in those countries, that we do have audit coverage for them, and I think that's what they're looking for. All right. What we do a lot is we have global audits sometimes that go across the U.S. and non-U.S., right? And we have to put ratings by legal entity, right? Again, the regulators want to see ratings for their country. So if, we might have a whole report that's a needs improvement, in totality across all the legal entities, but maybe one or two of the non-U.S. entities, they may be well controlled or adequately controlled. So, people want to see that on these audit reports. So I don't know how you guys work on it, but we do we might have overall ratings, but we do put good charts in to see, we rate the legal entities where we need to. So a regulator can see, okay, the full audit report was needs improvement, but in their country it was not needs improvement. So I think that's, very important. And then issues, the same thing in our issue tracking. When we're tracking outstanding issues, regulators want to see what action items pertain to them. So you have to come up with a way to tag this kind of stuff. You need a good system and database to make sure your reports and your issues are tagged correctly. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to meet the regulators' expectations. So and then you get, besides the regulators, now we move on to the second thing, which is the board packages, right? As I mentioned earlier, boards of different countries want to do different things. For example, in the U.S., we have some financial audits. Our financial audits, we don't include some of them for the U.S. regulators. But the European regulators often want to see some of our financial audits that we're doing, even though they apply to the whole corporation as a whole, right? It always seems to me that we're doing some kind of board package within our cream. So it takes a lot of time, for our administrative team or our management team. So it's challenging to keep up with the regulators and what they want. And again, and the audit plan, as you all know, an audit plan will change, right? Audit plans are changing all the time. So you've got to be able to make considerations up front. And the other thing is, as at NASDAQ, we are a global team and we work across the globe. And U.S. auditors are not as familiar with some of the Nordic boards. We go, well, why is that a big deal? But it's simpler in the U.S. when we do some of our board packages, because a lot of our exchanges come under the same board. For example, at NASDAQ, we have Philadelphia, Boston, NASDAQ. So the board reporting is much easier because we can cover multiple exchanges with one board package. Not so much so all the time in the non-U.S. Each of these Nordic boards wants something maybe a little different. So it just definitely creates a lot more complexity and time. So how do we meet some of these challenges? So what we do is we basically start with risk assessment and the yearly audit plan, right? It's very important when you build your plans up front is when you put a project on the audit plan, take the time up front to tag the legal entity, right? If you try and do this later on the fly, once the reports are issued, and then the board packages have to be built, it becomes very difficult. If you do it on the fly, it's not the best way to do it. So make sure you do it up front when you build your audit plan, and then you must have templates. Templates are a necessity here, right? And I'm going to show you an example coming up. Legal entities that, what are the legal entities that we have in your company? And if it is a legal entity that a report affects, who should get the audit report? Who should get the scope memo? So, I mean, you need to build that up front because it will save you a lot of time when you're trying to put these what audit reports do we have to send to which boards, right? And so this is some of the upfront templates that we work on. Another thing we do on all our audit reports is myself and Anne-Marie, and who hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, it runs our Nordic audit team. We take a look at all the audit, we took at all the scope memos and all the audit reports before they go out, and we do a QC check on it against our templates to make sure that the auditors who worked on it have the right CC list, the right legal entity coverage. Again, it's important. You may think it's not important, but it is. But it, again, goes back to the reporting to the regulators and the boards when they come calling. Do not underestimate the time this takes. It takes some time. So build it into your plans. This is what I was talking about earlier. Sounds simple, but become quite complicated. So we have a chart put together by business area, who the EVP might be, executive VP, the senior vice president. We have different lines, who our business unit controllers are, what those legal entities are within each business, and then who the CEO is. And this helps us build what I was talking about. That helps us build that CC list when we have to put that together for board packages. So it's a really good exercise to go through. I would go back and try and put something together for your team on this. I think it'll be very valuable later on in helping with your board reporting. So the third thing I want to talk about is delivering a consistent message, all right, across the organization. We are one audit team, and we do need to be in sync as we go across the country, as we go across the organization, right? English, as I said earlier, not the main language, right? The skills our team, the skills international teammates have may be taken for granted. We do our deliverables in English here, and so report writing becomes difficult, right, sometimes because writing styles differ so much. Writing is tough enough to have a consistent style, even if everybody spoke the same language. But when you're dealing with so many different languages and cultures, it becomes even more important. So how do we create this consistent message across the organization? Well, we do joint risk assessments, for example. Teams don't sit in on only auditees from their countries, right? So when we do our risk assessment up front, we mix and match the different teams across the world. All right, we do that. So you get to a mix of U.S. people sitting in on audit risk assessments from other countries, and vice versa. We form international teams for projects. We just don't put U.S. people on U.S. only and non-U.S. on non-U.S. We mix it up as much as we can, right? We have weekly and monthly staff meetings, right, where we get the whole audit team together on a call and we talk about things. It's only 22 people, but it really helps, with that consistent message. We have a yearly offsite where we bring everybody together, from across the country into usually New York, and we have a really good week of team building, and we go through issues, and everybody gets to spend face time with each other. For people who we only talk to on the phone a lot, but it's really helps build camaraderie among everyone, and it's really good. Standards and templates I talked about before. Build those templates for those CC lists and things like that. And the last thing is training, right? When we do training and all right, we have the same instructor for the U.S. and non-U.S. auditors. We don't do training. We don't really bring in trainers for the Europe or trainers for the U.S. We bring in the same trainer, and we make it work. So everybody has the same message. We do that with analytics, report writing, audit methodology, and so on and so forth. Other things I'd recommend you do: partake in each audit team's culture. We make an effort at NASDAQ in that yearly thing. We learned some really great things from our Swedish friends and Glögg, which is like a winery, and around Christmas time, and we've tasted that. We've adapted Bunday in Sweden every Wednesday, which is great. I love going to Sweden because at 2 o'clock on Wednesday, everybody comes down for pastries, and we try and replicate some of that in the U.S. when we can. And then, have auditors work in other countries. It builds a relationship with their teammates. Again, as I said, we send our auditors to different places, right? It really helps you understand the cultural differences that the other countries our auditors in other countries are facing. It also gives you some face time with the auditees in those countries. That's important. Auditees they talk to each other in the business across the world. Barriers don't exist anymore. So that's important in delivering the consistent message. You don't want auditees in one country talking to auditees in another and saying, well, man, you guys get preferential treatment. So we try and create the same message. And these are important. Again, being a sports guy, sporting events in different countries. When I was over in Sweden, I've attended some sporting events with my, Anne-Marie, and she turned me on to something called floorball, which is great, like hockey. So, I think these are some of the things that you should try if you're not doing it when you get back. Again, some of you may have really big audit shops, multicultural, but do the best you can to bring everybody together and do some of these things. Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, that's delivering a consistent message real quick. Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the hardest. Some of the other things I talked about are more task-driven, tangible. You can, build templates and things like that. But with the messaging is a little more soft skills, more subjective, and deals more with people. So yeah, it makes some sense. So hopefully you'll go back and take a look at some of those things that I talked about in delivering a consistent message and implement it. The last topic that I want to bring up is basically the universal language that everyone understands in audit. And so this gets back to hockey, which is my passion. But anyway, so here, hockey is the game. And why do I bring hockey in? Because hockey is a sport where basically brings together people from all over the world into hockey teams. If you follow, anyone who follows the NHL, most of the teams are made up of folks from all these different countries. And here's an example. Coming from Washington, you see Ovechkin, T.J. Oshie, and Backstrom from the different countries. They won the Stanley Cup last year. But again, these are folks that come from totally different backgrounds, totally different languages, but they succeed, right? Well, why do they succeed? Because they communicate visually, right, through the game. When they all see the same thing, they understand it. The game is their language, right? It's not based on culture. It's not based on, language, right? When you look at a hockey game or a sport they're all familiar with, they look at the game, they look at the play, and visually they understand each other. Hockey, they know what to do. So I think that's the point I like to use hockey here. So basically we could do the same thing, in internal audit. Well, hockey is visually, why hockey teams succeed with multinational players. They have a visual thing. Well, in audit, we can use data. Data and data analytics is our hockey. It's our visual, right? Basically, communication, I came up with this thought, communication through the data. When we're working with our auditors, our colleagues, we speak different languages. If we all look at the same thing visually, which is data, which is key to any audit, as we all know, then it becomes a lot better, right? It breaks down those cultural barriers. And so, for example, I'm going to give you a case study. We did a cash collateral audit, and I worked with an auditor in Sweden, who really understood it. We have a clearinghouse in the Nordics. It's a pretty complicated business, and so we were working on an audit to trace the cash collateral flow through different banks and different steps along the way. So my colleague in Sweden, she really understood the clearing business very well. She had some knowledge of data analytics, and I basically worked with her, and I had, obviously more experience with the analytics and really didn't know as much about the business. But together we used IDEA, which is our common analytics tool, and we became a lot better at achieving our audit objectives. And so that was like basically a win-win for everyone, right? By using data analytics as our visual tool, I understand the business a lot more. And my colleague now, she reinforced her knowledge of data analytics, as a powerful audit tool, and really now becomes a local IDEA champion. So it takes a little bit of some of my time, I get it back where I don't have to do as much training over there because now they're much more experienced in that. So data analytics is a great, great vehicle for multinational audit teams to use. And other efforts we've used data analytics is fraud assessments, collections, payroll, and these are audits we've done with teams from Sweden, U.S., and Lithuania. But the key to it is the data comes from a common system. We have a lot of global systems with T&E and AP, et cetera, so we're able to extract the data, and then using analytics, we all see the same thing. So it makes the audits go a lot better. So that's how we can communicate what we think are our problems by just looking at the data as a whole.
Okay.
All right, so thanks. So let's put it in action. A lot of what I just heard, at least a third of you are doing some of those things I've talked about, but we still have a lot of folks out there that may not be. So let's put it in action, right? And here it is. Team up with auditors from different international locations. You know, so a lot of you are doing it, but for those who are not, find a project. Try it out. Find a project. Use data analytics to work on this together and see how visually, when you look at the same thing, how it increases the efficiency, right? Some of you are partaking in other teams' audit culture. Great. Keep it up. Join risk meetings. Again, for the folks who are not doing it, I encourage you all to definitely partake in that. Again, when you get into more of the nuts and bolts, make sure those regulators are happy. We don't want them unhappy. So, you know, try and eliminate some of the thresholds and risk levels. Look at patterns more, right? Remember the key point. Regulators care about their countries. So when you build your audits, you do your testing, you do your sampling, keep that in mind, right? That, you know, that you're going to have the board packages are coming up and that you're going to have to report, you know, for each country. And finally, make those board packages, you know, get some templates together, as I talked about earlier. So when you put your CC list together, your legal entity coverages will make your life a lot easier. Again, the last couple points, you know, aside from that, remember, be tolerant of the other culture, right? Right. Remember, if you're in the U.S., remember all our friends on our audit team that are not in the U.S. and what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and that, you know, your way of performing audits is not the only way. There's another way of thinking out there. So again, we need each other to work together, and we need to, you know, be true partners, and we need to listen to each other. So those are my closing remarks, Jim. I will, you know, I know we have a couple minutes for some questions, and if I don't get to answer them, I'd be happy to answer them later on, you know, after the call.
Terrific, Lenny. Well, thank you very much for a great presentation. And I hope that everybody got a lot of useful information out of this. Well, I know we have a number of users from other countries that have joined us today. So if you have any questions, we do have a minute or two. So please share with us. I want to thank Lenny for a great presentation today, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I want to thank Caseware as well for providing the speaker for this event and for joining us in our webinar series. We like to provide these to our subscribers, our site license users, and the general audit population to share knowledge and deal with topics that are relevant. And I think this is one of the top areas that a lot of internal audit shops are looking at as multinational companies and culturism, and how we deal with these issues in our ever-shrinking world. So again, thank you for joining us, and if there are no other questions, Lenny, if you have any closing remarks, I know that you've done a great job of telling us about how things are at NASDAQ and your experience. So please feel free to.
Yeah, one or two. I know to get back to your license, there's a Caseware has a Unicode version of the software as well. So folks that are not in the U.S., I think the Unicode version has some specific things that are unique to English or non-U.S. type of the language. So that's also good as well. But I think that I would just encourage everyone to take a fresh look at how they're dealing with these topics and try it. Again, this is all built on 12 years of real experience dealing with multinational. And it's not just also, it applies to acquisitions when you're bringing in folks from might be all U.S., for example. Same things apply when you're bringing people in from other companies within your same country. There are differences there too, and so a lot of these concepts can be used to bridge the gap culture within I'd say a U.S. company. Language may not be an issue, but things like that.
Excellent. All right. Well, I know we have a number of IDEA users that have joined us, and there are a lot of non-users, non-IDEA users that have joined us as well. And you can go to the Caseware site, and you can download a trial version of Caseware IDEA, and give it a try, and it may pique your interest in looking at other ways of handling data analytics. So again, thank you, Beverly. Thank you, Lenny. And everybody have a great day. Thanks.